I was called a disgrace by my own parents. Not in private, not in anger, but in front of 200 guests at my own wedding. Just because I grow tomatoes instead of pushing papers. My name is Jackie Monroe, and I'm a 32-year-old farmer from Pennsylvania. This is the story of how I turned humiliation into a harvest they'd never forget. The air outside the small white chapel in Lancaster, Pennsylvania smelled faintly of lilacs and freshly cut grass. I stood just behind the old wooden doors bouquet, trembling slightly in my hands. My palms were sweaty, heart pounding louder than the music playing inside. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but I could feel the tension in my chest building like a storm about to break. Grace had told me this morning that everything would be perfect. She had smiled, kissed my forehead, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. But even her warm hands couldn't ease the cold pit that had formed in my stomach the moment I saw my parents stepping out of their car in the parking lot. I knew they disapproved. I knew they had never understood my choices. But deep down, some part of me hoped they would show up and simply be parents for one day. Just one. When the music swelled and the doors opened, I stepped into the sunlight spilling across the aisle. My eyes landed first on Grace, waiting at the altar, radiant and calm. Then I glanced left. There they were, Douglas and Carla Monroe. My father wore his usual stiff navy blazer, and my mother's face was frozen in that permanent expression of disappointment she had perfected over decades. Their voices didn't carry far, but it was enough. She really married a farmer. That was my mother, a lowly vegetable farmer. Who does that? I saw one of my cousins stifle a laugh. A few guests looked down at their feet, uncomfortable. Dad added we paid for college so she could shovel dirt and sell lettuce. Can you believe this? My steps faltered slightly, but I kept walking. Grace was smiling, her eyes fixed on mine. I took a breath. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The ceremony blurred. Words were said, vows exchanged. I vaguely remember sliding the ring onto Grace's finger, my hands, steadier than I felt. The kiss was soft and full of quiet love, grounding me just long enough to pretend everything was fine. The reception was held behind the chapel under strings of white lights and paper lanterns. Tables were decorated with wildflowers I had picked from the fields around our farm. It was beautiful in a simple, honest way. Grace had insisted on keeping it small and intimate. Her family laughed, toasted, and danced like they had all the joy in the world to spare. Mine barely clapped. At one point during the dinner, I heard my mother again this time, speaking to one of Grace's uncles. She could have been a lawyer or something real. But no, she wanted to grow kale. I closed my eyes for a second, holding the fork still in midair. After dessert, we had our first dance. Grace leaned into me, whispering, "Don't listen to them. You're the strongest woman I know." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Her words were like balm, but the sting underneath stayed. Later, as people gathered for speeches, my father stood up uninvited. I felt my gut twist. He raised his glass. "To my daughter Jackie, may she find success in the dirt, because apparently that's where her dreams live now." A few awkward chuckles, a clink of glasses, then silence. Grace looked at me, hands squeezing mine under the table. I smiled, a small, deliberate smile. "Thank you, Dad," I said, standing slowly. "And thank you, Mom, for reminding me where I come from." I didn't say more. I didn't need to. I lifted my glass and toasted with the rest, then sat down. Inside I was shaking, but outside I was still. When the music picked up again, I took Grace's hand and led her to the dance floor. We swayed under the stars, pretending for a moment that we were alone in the world. And for a while, that was enough. The morning after, I sat alone on the porch swing with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The dawn mist clung to the field, softening the rows of kale and tomatoes I had planted months ago. I watched the sun rise over the barn, same as I had for nearly a decade, and let the stillness wrap around me like armor. The wedding had passed, the guests were gone, and the silence in the house was louder than any argument. Grace was still asleep inside her dress draped carefully over the chair by the bedroom door. But I couldn't sleep, not after everything. Memories crept in without invitation. It had been the spring of 20 when I dropped out of Temple University. Dad had just lost his job at the plant, and Mom's credit cards were maxed out. The house was a month away from foreclosure. They didn't ask me to come home. They expected it. I sold my books, packed my dorm room into 2 boxes, and took the Greyhound back to Lancaster. That first summer, I worked 2 shifts at the farmer's market, then drove the truck to neighboring counties to peddle what little we had. I thought it was temporary. I thought they would appreciate the sacrifice. Instead, Mom used the money I sent to buy new furniture. Dad started gambling again. By 2016, I realized if I didn't do something different, we would all sink. That's when I found a course online about organic farming, soil rotation, and small-scale sustainability. I saved every penny, took the course at night, and by the next spring I had turned the backyard into a trial plot. The neighbors laughed, but I kept planting. Ethan, my younger brother, was supposed to be helping. Instead, he drank, played video games, and burned through what little savings I had scraped together. Whenever I asked him to take the truck out or help fix the fencing, he vanished. He only appeared when he needed money. Always with the same excuse: it's for gas, it's for a friend, I'll pay you back. He never did. Then came the second mortgage. Mom said it was just to cover a minor surgery. I found out later she used most of it to pay off a cruise she had already gone on. When I confronted her, she said I wouldn't understand, that I had no kids, no real responsibilities, that I owed them for raising me. The worst part, everything was in their name. The house, the land, even the farm truck. I had no legal say. I didn't know enough back then to ask for documentation or power of attorney. I just kept working, assuming that love meant trust and that trust meant fairness. I was wrong. In 2019, I tried applying for a business grant. The officer asked for property ownership documents. That was the first time I realized I owned nothing. Not legally. Dad said we were a family, that paperwork only mattered to outsiders. He patted my shoulder and told me not to be dramatic. Last year, I approached them again. I wanted to refinance part of the land to expand the farm. They laughed, told me to wait until Ethan got his act together, said they couldn't sign off on anything without thinking about his future too. His future. The boy who hadn't worked a full month in 10 years. I clenched my mug tighter, the bitterness of the coffee matching the taste in my mouth. I had traded my future to protect theirs. I had handed them my years, my effort, and all they had to say was that I was ungrateful. The screen door creaked open behind me. "You're up early," Grace murmured, stepping onto the porch in her robe. She slipped beside me, her warmth cutting through the chill. Couldn't sleep. I know. I heard them last night. I stared out at the field. They always talk like that. I should be used to it. That doesn't mean it hurts any less. I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were tired but kind. She didn't push me to explain. She just sat there, fingers laced with mine. A part of me still wanted their approval, still chased after it like a dog after a car. But something had shifted last night, something irreversible, and I wasn't sure yet if that was grief or freedom. Rest of that morning. She moved through the kitchen quietly, made herself a small breakfast, and then disappeared into the laundry room with a basket full of wrinkled linens. I tried to stay out of her way, assuming she needed time. But by mid-afternoon, I realized her silence wasn't about space. It was a choice. When she finally did speak, it was at the worst possible moment. I was standing in this greenhouse checking the drip irrigation when her voice came sharp through the open door. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I looked up, blinking. "Say anything when at the wedding, when they humiliated you." I straightened. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like an excuse. They always talk like that. I've gotten used to it. She stared at me, lips parted like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Used to it, Jackie. They insulted you in front of everyone we love. They mocked your work, your life, our marriage." I turned off the hose valve. "Grace, no, let me finish." Her voice cracked. "I married you because I thought you were strong, because you stand tall in the face of everything. But last night you just stood there. What did you want me to do? Start a fight in front of the whole family? No. I wanted you to defend yourself. I wanted you to act like it mattered." "It does matter," I whispered. "Then why do you act like it doesn't?" We stood in silence, surrounded by the quiet hiss of warm plastic walls and the faint smell of wet soil. "I'm not them, Jackie. I'm not going to treat you like they do. But I need to know you'll fight for yourself. Because if you won't, how can I believe you'll fight for us?" She left that night, packed a small overnight bag, and said she needed to stay with her friend Vanessa in Harrisburg for a few days. Said she needed to think. I watched her car pull away down the gravel road, the taillights disappearing into the dusk. The house felt colder the moment she left. The silence, once comforting, now pressed heavy against my chest. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned the chicken coop, repaired a fence gate that had been leaning for weeks, baked a batch of banana bread I didn't eat. Each room echoed with her absence. I found her note the next morning on the fridge. Just one line. "I love you, but love needs strength." For the first time since the wedding, I let myself cry. Not from hurt, but from something deeper. Shame. I had thought I was keeping the peace. I had convinced myself that silence was strength. But Grace didn't want peace. She wanted presence. That night I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the dried lavender she had hung above the sink the week before. The farm felt bigger without her, emptier. I climbed into bed without brushing my teeth and lay awake, counting the ceiling fan rotations. 173 before I finally drifted into a restless sleep. She didn't call the next day. The sun came up without fanfare. I walked out to the field like I did every morning, boots crunching over dew-soaked grass. I checked on the tomatoes, made sure the drip lines weren't clogged, and tried not to think about Grace. The silence wasn't just in the house anymore, it followed me outside too. Around 9, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. When I finally wiped my hands on my jeans and checked, there were 4 missed calls and 2 texts from my friend Maddie, who helped me sell produce through local vendors. "Have you seen what Ethan posted? You need to handle this ASAP." I clicked the link she sent. The video opened to the familiar shaky angle of a cell phone recording. My father's toast from the wedding. His voice, smug and slurred, just enough echoed through my phone. "To my daughter, may she find success in the dirt, because apparently that's where her dreams live now." Then my mother's comment spliced in right after. "She gave up college to grow kale. Classic Jackie." Ethan had captioned it with something crude. From Ivy League dreams to lettuce queen. The whole thing was edited like a joke, complete with laughing emojis and a dumb banjo track. It had over 300,000 views. My chest tightened. I scrolled through the comments. People laughing, others calling me a failure, a disgrace. Some defending me, but they were drowned out. I sat on the porch steps, heart pounding. I felt exposed, like someone had ripped away the thin layer of peace I'd been trying to hold on to. By noon, Maddie called again. "We've had 3 vendors pull out already. They said they're worried about your image hurting their brand." I tried to stay calm. Which one's the market in York, that organic box co-op in Allentown, and that specialty grocery in Reading? My throat went dry. Those contracts made up nearly half my monthly revenue. "It's a TikTok video," I said. "People forget those in a week, not when it goes viral with your name tagged all over it." I thanked her and hung up. The farm felt different that afternoon, smaller, vulnerable. I walked to the barn and sat inside for a long time, surrounded by the hum of the old freezer and the soft cluck of hens. I needed to think. Around 3, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. "Hi, is this Jackie Monroe?" "Yes, speaking. This is Ellie Franklin from EverHarvest. I'm on the brand partnerships team." I paused, caught off guard. "We're scheduled to launch your produce in 3 regional stores next month," she continued. "But in light of some recent online chatter, we'd like to schedule a meeting. Nothing formal yet, just a conversation about brand positioning and your public narrative." I swallowed. "Of course. I understand. When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. via Zoom." I wrote it down, thanked her, and ended the call, then just sat there in the barn, staring at the dust motes spinning in a shaft of sunlight. Public narrative. That was a polite way of saying damage control. I didn't know what I'd say. I didn't know how to spin this. But I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't start fighting for this farm now, I might lose more than just a few contracts. I might lose everything I built. Reborn from the soil. The next morning, I was up before dawn, pacing the kitchen with a mug of black coffee that had long gone cold. At 9:57, I clicked into the Zoom room and waited, hands shaking in my lap. Ellie Franklin appeared with a smile too practiced to be real. She thanked me for joining and then gently launched into questions about my mission, my values, and how I planned to address the viral video. I took a breath, steadied my voice, and spoke. I told her why I started the farm. I told her about sustainability, about food deserts, about creating something honest with my hands. I didn't apologize. I reframed. I let the words pour out like planting seeds, hoping something would take root. When it ended, she said she'd take it back to her team and get back to me soon. After the call, I grabbed my keys and drove into town to meet Linda Vega, a local attorney Maddie had recommended. I explained everything in her small office lined with law books and family photos. I told her about the land, the old paperwork, the viral video, and the pressure I was under. "Let's start by checking the property records," she said. An hour later, Linda frowned at her screen. "This says the farm title was transferred in 2017. "Not to you. To Douglas and Carla Monroe. My parents." My hands went cold. "That's not right. I've been paying the taxes, the mortgage. I signed transfer papers years ago." Linda nodded. "I see that here. But they filed a quitclaim deed in your name that was never notarized correctly. That makes it invalid, so technically the farm isn't mine." "Not on paper. Not yet." I stared at the screen like it might change if I looked hard enough. But Linda didn't stop there. She scrolled through old files, pulled up documents I hadn't seen in years. Then she found it. "This one's interesting. A power of attorney form from 2017. Looks like they had you sign it after a family emergency." I nodded slowly. "My mom said it was so she could help pay bills while I was out in the field all day. It's not legally binding. It lacks proper witness signatures." "You've got a case here." I blinked. For the first time all week, a flicker of hope. Later that evening, I called Grace. She didn't answer, but I left a message. I know I've been quiet. I know I let things happen without pushing back. But I'm trying now. Really trying. I'm fighting for this place and for us. Before bed, I opened my old notebook, the one where I used to sketch plans for the garden beds. I flipped to the last page and started writing again. Scholarship fund for young farmers. Provide training, small grants, seasonal mentorship. I wanted to help others who grew up like me, who got told dirt wasn't a dream. As I looked out over the dark field beyond my window, I felt something shift. The soil didn't just grow food, it grew me. It started with the tomatoes. I was pruning the lower vines in the greenhouse, sweat pooling at my collarbone, dirt pressed deep into the grooves of my hands. The simple rhythm of snip-drop step usually calmed me. But that morning, every leaf I cut felt like something was being stripped from me too. I stopped, crouched there between rows, and cried. Not the kind of tears that built up behind your eyes and politely asked to be released. These were the gut-heavy, shoulder-shaking kind. I pressed my forehead against my arm and let it all come up. The betrayal, the humiliation, the exhaustion. They made a joke out of me. My own parents, my brother, people I'd carried on my back while building something real, something good. And now they were watching it unravel like it meant nothing. I didn't hear the old pickup until it was nearly at the gate. The rusted engine gave a cough, then silence. I stood wiping my face on my sleeve and walked to the edge of the property. Reverend Miller stepped out, adjusting his hat against the sun. He was older than the hills, but his eyes missed nothing. He'd baptized half the kids in this county, buried just as many elders. He walked with a limp and a cane carved with scripture. "Thought I'd check on you," he said. "Heard there's been trouble." "Word travels fast," I muttered, trying to smile. He looked at me hard. "Blood travels faster." We sat on 2 overturned buckets by the shed. He didn't rush me, just handed me a bottle of water and waited. "They took the farm, Reverend, and now they're ruining what little name I had left." He nodded like he already knew. "That kind of pain doesn't need explanation." Then he leaned forward. "Not everyone born from the same root deserves a spot in your soil." I blinked at him. "That's not in the Bible." He chuckled. "No, but it's in life. You can love them and still leave them. You can honor the past without dragging it behind you like a plow through rocks." I looked down at my boots caked in dust and guilt. He stood slowly, patting my shoulder. "You built this place, Jackie, with calluses and kindness. Don't let folks who only show up to poison wells convince you the land ain't yours." He left before I could say much more, but his words echoed louder than any sermon. That night I sat at my desk and stared at my phone. Ethan had called again. 5 times in the past 2 days. I hadn't answered any of them. This time I didn't even listen to the voicemail. I blocked the number. Then I pulled out a sheet of paper and started writing. "Dear Mom and Dad." It wasn't anger in my pen. It was clarity. I wrote about the lies, the manipulation, the way they twisted my silence into permission. I told them I would no longer accept a role in their family if it required erasing myself. I didn't yell on the page, I stated facts. I wrote with finality. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with my initials. The next morning I walked it to the post office myself. I didn't tell Grace, I didn't call Maddie, I didn't post about it, I just mailed it. Then I walked back to the farm and started drafting my presentation for the farm gala. It was time to tell my story in my own words, on my own terms. I had just finished checking the irrigation valves when I saw Ethan's car pull into the driveway. My heart sank. It had been weeks since I blocked his number, but clearly he'd found another way to reach me. He got out wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and cheap sunglasses, looking less smug than usual. I didn't say a word as he walked up to the porch. "Hey, Jackie." He started trying to sound casual. Look, I know things got a little heated. I folded my arms. He cleared his throat. I was out of line. Posting that video was dumb. I got carried away. You know how the internet works. It blew up and I didn't think it would hurt you that bad. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't think it would hurt me? He winced. Okay, I knew it might, but I didn't think the backlash would come for me too. People are brutal online. They're calling me a leech, a parasite. I lost 2 sponsorships this week. I stayed quiet, so I was thinking maybe we could team up. I know social media. I could help run your farm page. Spin this whole thing around, make you look like the underdog hero. People eat that up. I shook my head. No. Jackie, come on. I'm trying here. No, Ethan. You're trying to salvage your own reputation, not mine. I built this farm. You burned it down for views. He looked annoyed now, less apologetic. Fine. But maybe you should think twice before slamming the door, because I still remember freshman year. That little episode you had, the anxiety meds, the counseling sessions. That's not exactly a brand-safe backstory. My blood went cold. Are you threatening me? He raised his hands. I'm just saying, if this goes to court over land, maybe a judge would want to know about your mental history. Especially if you're claiming mom and dad manipulated you. I stepped back, disgusted. Get off my property. You don't want to do this, Jackie. I said nothing, just walked inside, locked the door, and closed the blinds. Later that night, I replayed the conversation over and over. But then it was his, the way he smirked when he thought he had meddled. I pulled out an old recorder I used for farm logs and set it on the table. Then I opened a document on my laptop and began typing everything I remembered. Word for word, every threat, every offer. The next time he called, I'd let it go to voicemail. I'd save every message. If he came back, I'd record it all. He wanted a war, fine, but I wouldn't fight it with rage, I'd fight it with truth. Farm gala and the reckoning. The night before the farm gala, I barely slept. My nerves rattled like loose screws in a tin roof. I had gone over the presentation a dozen times, rehearsed my lines in front of Maddie, even practiced my pacing in the barn. Still, I kept second-guessing myself. But when I stood in front of the mirror that morning, zipping up my navy blazer and tucking a sprig of lavender in the lapel, something settled. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my name. The convention center in Raleigh buzzed with the kind of polished energy that made me feel like a scarecrow in a room full of mannequins. I recognized faces from agtech startups, university boards, sustainability councils. Grace met me near the check-in booth, her presence grounding me like roots in soil. You ready? She asked. I nodded, as I'll ever be. Ever Harvest had the last keynote slot of the day. The auditorium seats filled up fast. Someone handed me a mic. A young intern asked if I wanted to play any media during the talk. I handed him a thumb drive with one video. He raised an eyebrow when he saw the file name. I didn't explain. When my name was announced, the applause was polite but sparse. I stepped into the spotlight. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackie Monroe, and I'm the founder of Willow Acre, a small organic farm in Jackson County. You probably haven't heard of it. That's okay. Most good things grow quietly. I walked them through the beginnings, leaving school, coming home, paying off debt I didn't make, learning soil by touch, not textbooks, building a greenhouse with second-hand parts and stubborn hope. I didn't sugarcoat the failures. Then I said, a few months ago, this was me. The video began to play. It was grainy cell phone footage of my wedding reception. My father's voice rang out, dripping sarcasm. Our little farmer girl, huh? Traded textbooks for turnips, raised by manure, married at a barn. The room went quiet. I let it play. every smug chuckle, every condescending look. I didn't flinch. When it ended, I looked up. That clip went viral. Not because it was funny, but because people recognize shame when they see it, and they know courage when someone refuses to return it. Gasps turned to nods. I felt the mood shift like a tide. We can't always choose our routes, but we can decide how deep we grow. Willow Acre is more than a farm, it's a statement. That resilience matters, that dignity doesn't need approval. I clicked to the final slide, a mock-up of Willow Acre's newest line of fresh produce barcoded and labeled Forever Harvest shelves. The logo gleamed. After a beat of stunned silence, the applause came. Not polite this time, thunderous. The Ever Harvest executive walked on stage and shook my hand. We are proud to announce a 5-year, $3.2 million distribution partnership with Willow Acre Farms. And we believe this is just the beginning. Cameras flashed. I blinked hard to keep tears from blurring my vision. Somewhere in the crowd, I saw Ethan's face. Pale, tight-jawed. Then I stopped looking. I had my story, and this time I told it loud enough for the whole room to hear. A week after the farm gala, I got a call from my parents. Well, technically, it was a text from Mom and 2 missed calls from Dad. The message was short: we'd like to talk in person. I didn't reply immediately. I needed time. So I talked to Linda Vega, my attorney, and we arranged for a meeting at her office in Charlotte. Neutral ground, professional setting, no surprises. They arrived 5 minutes late. Mom wore a floral dress that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in years, and Dad looked thinner than I remembered. Ethan wasn't with them. Linda greeted them politely, then motioned to the chairs across from me. I kept my posture straight, my expression unreadable. Mom started first. "Jackie, sweetheart, we saw your speech. It was powerful. You really have built something special." Dad nodded once, avoiding my eyes. I looked at Linda. She slid a folder across the table and opened it. Inside were documents, bank statements, property records, notarized letters. Linda spoke evenly. "Ms. Monroe has evidence of coercion in the transfer of property rights from 2017, as well as documentation of financial misuse dating back to 2015. Mom paled. Dad shifted in his seat. Linda continued. "We are not pursuing legal charges. Jackie's only request is for full removal of your names from any assets currently tied to Willow Acre. This includes land equipment and brand affiliations." Mom's voice cracked. "You want to erase us?" I finally spoke. "I want to protect what I built, what I paid for, what I grew while you mocked it." Dad's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I leaned forward slightly. "You took everything I gave and called it weakness. You used my labor, my loyalty, and then shamed me for the result. Being a parent doesn't grant you the right to humiliate your child forever." Mom's eyes welled up. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said softly. Over and over. Linda slid another form across the table. Signatures, deadlines, a path forward. They stared at it. A full minute passed. Dad picked up the pen first, then Mom. No dramatic outburst, no protest, just ink and silence. As they left, Mom glanced back once. But I didn't return the look. I wasn't erasing them. I was drawing the line they refused to see. For the first time, the land was mine in name, in law, and in truth. The lavender field had just begun to bloom when Grace returned. I saw her car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window, the same spot where I had once stood and cried with anger, and this time I simply breathed. She stepped out wearing that denim jacket with the frayed cuffs and a calm on her face that mirrored my own. I met her at the edge of the porch, unsure whether to speak first. Instead, we just stood there for a moment, the silence doing its own work. "I missed you," she said. Not like a confession, but a truth. I missed me too, I replied. We didn't fall into each other's arms. We walked slowly toward the far end of the property where the lavender met the edge of the woods. It was the same path we'd walked when she first visited Willow Acre before anything had walls or revenue. You stood up for yourself, she said after a while. That matters. I nodded. I wasn't sure it would ever happen. She glanced at me. I was never mad that they hurt you. I was mad that you let them. I know. We stopped at the old oak tree. The breeze carried a scent that reminded me of fresh beginnings. Grace turned to me. You don't have to forgive them, she said, but don't forget who you are when they're not around. It landed differently this time, like a seed finally touching soil. We returned to the barn and opened the seed crates. Spring planting had started and new rows needed to be charted. We worked side by side, hands in dirt mapping something larger than produce. It was purpose. We reached the west plot just before dusk. The light filtered through the trees like an old hymn. I turned to her holding a small packet of marigold seeds. Will you plant this with me? She smiled soft and sure. Always. We knelt together, pressing the seeds gently into the soil. Fingers brushed. No words. Just breath and earth and forgiveness growing 1 inch at a time. That night, Grace stayed for dinner. I made herb chicken with roasted beets from last season's harvest, and she sat at the kitchen island flipping through a seed catalog while I chopped. We talked about nothing monumental, just weather and compost and whether lavender or sage would hold up better near the fence. After we ate, she walked the perimeter of the house with me. The porch lights glowed amber in the early spring chill, and when she reached for my hand, I let her hold it. You know, she said, you could apply for the county's expansion grant. It's competitive, but I think Willow Acre could qualify. I'll look into it. I squeezed her hand. It feels strange, not fighting, not defending, just planning. That's what peace feels like, Jackie. I smiled, a little surprised at how easy it came. Later, while she showered, I opened my notebook and began sketching new layouts for the herb beds. A second greenhouse might be possible if the grant came through. I made a note to call the supplier in the morning. When Grace emerged, her hair damp and curling at the ends, she found me still at the table. You're glowing, she said. Am I? She nodded, like someone who finally knows where she belongs. I stood and crossed to her. I do, Grace, I do. We didn't talk much more that night. We just existed in the space we'd built, not with concrete and lumber, but with honesty and intention. The next morning, I rose before dawn. While Grace slept, I pulled on boots and walked the length of the property. Fog clung to the rows of kale and spinach. The soil was cool under my fingers. This land was no longer just survival. It was mine to define, and maybe now finally mine to share. I walked back up the hill from the field dew, still clinging to my boots and the morning air crisp with promise. It felt different now. The same land, the same barn, the same work, but no longer under the weight of trying to prove my worth to people who never really saw me. The day after Grace and I planted the marigolds, I filed the paperwork for the Willow Acre Agricultural Scholarship. It started small, a single $5,000 award for one local student interested in sustainable farming. But Linda helped me draft the legal framework to expand it each year. I named it after my grandmother Florence Monroe, the only person in my family who ever told me that dirt under my nails was something to be proud of. Applications began rolling in within a month. Kids from towns I'd never heard of. Some wrote about their dreams of healing land destroyed by pesticides. Others talked about feeding their communities in food deserts. One boy submitted a drawing of his dream farm, complete with goats wearing hats. I cried reading that one. In the same breath of progress, the past kept tugging. Ethan's TikTok clout vanished overnight after he mocked another farmer who turned out to be a disabled veteran. The backlash was swift. Sponsors dropped him. Someone sued him for sharing private footage from their wedding without consent. When the subpoena arrived, Linda called me laughing. "Karma doesn't need you to lift a finger," she said. And I didn't. I had stopped refreshing his page weeks ago. Instead, I focused on the greenhouse. With the grant money Grace encouraged me to apply for, I built a second unit. This one housed native medicinal herbs. We named it Clara's Haven after Grace's mother, who died of cancer when Grace was 18. It was Grace's idea to offer free workshops there on weekends. She said healing should be grown too. Volunteers came. Not just interns or college students, but women in their 40s and 50s, divorced or widowed, looking for something to tend besides memory. They laughed in the dirt beside the interns. They called me boss lady, and I didn't hate it. On a warm Thursday in August, the first batch of scholarship recipients arrived for orientation. We walked the property, pruning rosemary and laying compost. I told them about my first greenhouse, the moldy one with the leaky roof, and how I almost gave it all up in 2020 when a blight wiped out my entire lettuce crop. "You didn't quit," one girl said. "No, I replanted. And now so will you." The second farm gala came that fall. I wore navy blue and pinned a sprig of lavender to my blazer. Grace stood beside me while I spoke, her presence as grounding as ever. My parents weren't invited, but I didn't feel their absence. I felt my own presence more. This time when I played the wedding clip again, I didn't flinch. I let their laughter echo across the screen and watched as the room went silent. Then I spoke about resilience, about dignity, about how not all growth is visible. Ever Harvest renewed their contract, even doubled the order. That night, after the lights dimmed and the guests had left, I stood in the middle of the empty venue and breathed it all in. It wasn't about vindication anymore, it was about direction. We drove home in silence, fingers interlaced on the console between us. Back at Willow Acre, Grace curled up on the couch while I made cocoa. We didn't need words. The life we had sown together didn't require commentary. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly and whispered, "I'm proud of her." Grace shifted beside me. "Proud of who, me?" I said. She kissed my shoulder and said, "Good." The next morning, we rose early and walked the perimeter again. The marigolds had bloomed wild, spilling over the edge of the rows like fire. And in the stillness, I realized this wasn't just the life I had built. It was the one I chose. Every day with both hands in the soil. By spring, the first seedlings of the scholarship program had rooted into something real. We expanded to include mentorships, internships, and small startup grants. The local high school added a farm science elective, and Grace and I were invited to speak during their spring assembly. Standing in that gym, watching students shift in their metal chairs, I saw a bit of myself in the girl chewing her pen cap and the boy who crossed his arms and looked down, pretending not to care. I told them about the soil, how it saved me. Not because it was easy or glamorous, but because it asked for everything I had and gave something honest back. I told them how I used to think my family's validation was the finish line until I realized my worth wasn't a group project. When it was over, a student approached me. She looked about 16 with dyed green hair and a backpack covered in band patches. She asked if you could be both broken and brave at the same time. "Yes," I said. "Most brave people are." I signed a few copies of my new book. It was called Digging Deep: Why Dirt Never Disappointed Me. Linda joked I should have gone with Making Peace with Manure, but I had already ordered the print run. The book wasn't a bestseller. but it didn't need to be. It was mine. My story told in my own time, in my own words. EverHarvest picked up another round of contracts, this time with a regional grocery chain. We hired 2 more part-time staff, including a young man named Daryl who had just gotten out of a youth rehabilitation program. He worked with quiet precision and smiled when Grace brought cookies. As for Ethan, the lawsuit dragged into the new year. I stayed out of it. Sometimes Linda would give me updates and I'd nod without comment. Not because I didn't care, but because I had finally learned to invest my energy where it bloomed. My parents didn't reach out again. Not for holidays. Not for birthdays. And while part of me still ached for the idea of them, the actual people didn't hold power over me anymore. Instead, we hosted our first Willow Acre Harvest Day that October. Families came from counties over to pick pumpkins, taste fresh cider, and walk the new herbal labyrinth Grace had designed. One little boy dropped his apple and burst into tears. Grace bent down, wiped it off, and handed it back. "It's okay to be messy," she said. That night, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and we sat with muddy boots and aching backs, I watched the string lights flicker against the barn. I thought about what Grace once told me sitting in the dark after our wedding. You don't have to forgive them all. Just don't forget who you are. I hadn't, and I wouldn't. The next week, I stood in front of a group of high school seniors. I held up a worn gardening glove and said, "You don't need to be born into support to grow something lasting. You just need to believe you're worth the tending." Their applause was soft, unsure, but one girl lingered afterward. She asked what to do when even your own family tells you you're worthless. I paused. You remember that their words are not your definition. You build your own. And as I walked to my truck, feeling the weight of the afternoon sun and the promise of the next planting season, I whispered the words that had carried me through every storm. I didn't fight back with rage. I let my roots speak. They heard me. What about you? If the people who should lift you up are the first to push you down, what would you do if you found this story meaningful? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real voices and quiet triumphs.